Every so often in a Fire Emblem game, there comes a unit that you feel is almost impossible to bench. A unit that you only consider benching because you've used them too many times on multiple playthroughs. Whether it's because they're so incredibly strong and fun to use, you really like their personality and characterization, or you quite literally can't bench them as much as you'd like to. Well, for me, one of my favorite units in all of Fire Emblem fits the first two categories. That unit is the mighty scarlet-haired paladin, Titania. Before the events of Path of Radiance, Titania was a knight serving Crimea. One fateful day in her service, Titania entered an officer exchange program and was sent to Gallia. During her time there, she participated in a joint training session where she would meet a legendary swordsman by the name of Greil. In front of her own eyes, she witnessed Greil as he defeated wave after wave of knights with his incredible swordsmanship. And in Titania's own words, "He's the most incredible knight I've ever seen." After the training session, Titania asked Greil to train her and they would spar whenever there was a free hour, and the two grew quite close. After weeks of training, Greil would invite Titania over to his home to meet his wife Elena and his children Ike and Mist. Over the next couple of years, Titania would develop unrequited feelings for Greil, but would keep it a secret even after Elena's death. Her reason being that she knew how much Greil loved his wife. Over the next couple of years, Titania would help Greil with his grief and start the Greil Mercenaries, and the events of Path of Radiance start. The player's first introduction to Titania is in Chapter 1. As the second in command of the Greil Mercenaries, she's sent to help Ike on his first ever mission and takes on an advisor role for Ike, giving tips and combat advice. In the second chapter, Titania has a conversation with Riss, and he mentions that he was told to give a letter to the Red Tressed Knight. Titania reads it and tells Riss to immediately give the letter to Oscar and tells him to prepare for combat and wait for her to return. The letter states that Mist and Rolf have been kidnapped by bandits. Titania goes to get backup and finds Ike and Riss missing upon her return. She quickly rushes towards the bandits' hideout on her mount to find Ike and the group fighting to save his little sister. Titania arrives, and even though Ike apologizes, she keeps a level head and tells him to worry about that later and to focus on the battle at hand. Just when everyone thinks they've won, a hidden bandit takes Rolf as hostage and forces everyone to drop their weapons. Titania, level-headed as always, gets the group to stand down. The bandit tries to seize the opportunity to attack Rolf, but is suddenly killed by an arrow flying, seemingly out of nowhere. The shot was made by another member of the Greil Mercenaries. Turns out that those reinforcements Titania went out of her way to get weren't a waste of time. The next job requires Ike, Titania, Shinon, and Gatry to take on a group of pirates harassing a nearby village. After the relatively easy mission, Shinon and Gatry complained about the missions being a bit too easy. It's there that Titania gets probably the most angry we've seen her yet, when she takes their words as them complaining that Greil is mismanaging them. Even Ike brings up that it's a bit out of character. She explains that sometimes the work is all about helping people in need, not the fame or fortune. Chapter 5 is when the story of Path of Radiance really starts to pick up. We learn that Dane has started a war with Crimea, which is seen as sort of a homeland for the group and Titania. Greil tells Ike to lead his men and head out on a scouting mission. The mercenaries go to battle with some very aggressive Dane soldiers and find an unconscious woman claiming to be Princess Alencia of Crimea. While Titania and the others are pondering if the woman is speaking the truth, a bunch of soldiers show up surrounding the camp, demanding that they hand over the princess. Greil decides to hold a quick meeting, asking everyone what they should do. Titania says that their best option is to not hand her over, as the company's reputation will suffer, and if they keep her safe, their stock will rise in the eyes of their primary employers. Greil ultimately decides to protect the young woman and take her to Gallia. Everything changes for the group at the end of Chapter 7. Late one eerie night, Greil is challenged to a fight by an old student of his. Ike runs from the camp and witnesses an intense duel and the death of his father at the hands of the Black Knight. Greil's death is a huge turning point for everyone in the group. While everyone is grieving, Titania, who should be one of the people hurting the most, stays strong and tells everyone that Ike will be the next leader of the Greil Mercenaries. Shinon and Gatry, on the other hand, don't agree with that decision. They believe that Titania should be the one taking over instead of the inexperienced Ike. This decision shows a lot of how much Titania respects and trusts both Ike and, more importantly, Greil. Titania knows that Greil wanted Ike to take over as commander, and even though it's earlier than anyone could have expected, Titania respects Greil's wishes and for the rest of the story becomes the advisor for Commander Ike, teaching him the ins and outs of being the commander. Titania is one of those rare characters that shows up in multiple games. Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn is a sequel game that takes place 3 years after the events of Path of Radiance. There isn't much in the story to talk about that relates to Titania. She mainly just sticks by Ike's side throughout the events of Radiant Dawn as an advisor for the Greil Mercenaries. Through the story and Titania's supports, we learn a lot of things about her. For one and most obvious, Commander Greil plays a huge role in Titania's life. In her support with Ike, we learn a lot about Titania's backstory and how much Greil impacted her life. From being a Crimean knight to meeting and being trained by Greil and eventually falling in love. We've talked about her backstory a lot already, but another huge key in the support is how much Titania changed Ike and Greil's lives, and how much they appreciate her for all that she's done. Titania was there for Greil to help him build his company. She was there for him when he lost his wife. Ike is extremely appreciative of Titania for helping him polish his swordsmanship and for making Greil's last living years happy. But more so, he's appreciative of her always being there for him and hopes she'll continue to support him as a leader of the Greil Mercenaries. In Titania's other support with Boyd, we see a lot more of how Titania is a very strong role model and leader in a strong motherly type of role for the Greil Mercenaries. In the C support, Titania makes sure that Boyd trains hard because she's worried that his lack of training might become his downfall someday and get him killed. In the B and A supports, we see Titania praise Boyd after he starts training harder and they start to take on more intense battles. We also see how much the other characters appreciate Titania. Boyd tries to get Titania a gift with his hard-earned money as a thanks for helping him. Before Titania can decline, Boyd interrupts, calling her the prettiest person he's ever seen. Titania tries to explain that the relationship isn't like that, but Boyd interrupts again and says, "You're like a really nice mom or something." Speaking of Titania's strong motherly energy, her support with Mist is just the sweetest, most adorable thing ever. Mist wants to make Ike buy a new shirt, but Titania notices that the sleeve of Mist's dress is all ripped up just as bad. In the B support, the two head out to town, and towards the end of their trip, Titania reflects on how Mist really needed this break, commenting on how kind and considerate she is, just like her mother Elena. We end things off in the A support with Titania gifting Mist a cute dress that they saw while out in town. Titania's been thinking for a while now that Mist has been putting others before herself, so Titania decides to make her feel special with that dress. Titania has sort of a motherly role in Mist's life, and this support just melts my heart. Last but not least, Titania's final support is with Riss. We learned about how the two met one day when Riss saved Titania's life. Titania was on a mission with Gatry and Shinon to take out some bandits. They had a relatively easy time taking them out, but one tried to escape into a nearby forest and Titania chased after. Unfortunately for Titania, she almost lost her life that day. The bandits she had been chasing took an opportunity to strike when Titania's horse had gotten them stuck by an undergrowth. Titania would have died if Shinon hadn't taken out the bandit before they could finish off Titania, and she probably still would have died if not for Riss finding a wounded Titania after he just so happened to venture a bit deeper into the forest than he normally would. Titania expresses her gratitude for Riss and the support, thanking him for allowing her to pick up an axe again. Riss follows up by thanking her for convincing Greil to let him join so he can provide money for his old parents. The B support focuses much more on Riss, but to summarize, Riss asks Titania if he can join her to train. He wants to defend himself so he can feel like less of a burden. Titania protests, saying that it's their job to protect the healers, and wonders if Riss would have been happier if he had never joined the Greil Mercenaries. Riss quickly shuts her down, saying he loves his job and the opportunity Titania gave him. The A support is much more interesting. Titania asks Riss what he thinks about Ike. Riss states that he thinks Ike is a very strong-willed and determined man, fit to lead the mercenaries. Titania's reason for asking is she's a bit worried. Maybe she wonders if she made the right choice by making Ike the leader of the mercenaries so young. She's worried about how Ike will react with the mercenary group getting so much bigger, with more mouths to feed. Riss cheers her up and reassures her how similar Ike is to his father and his ideals, and that reaffirms Titania's trust and faith in Ike. That's it for the Path of Radiance supports. Now moving on to Radiant Dawn supports. Oh wait, they don't exist. Yeah, you probably know how I feel about Radiant Dawn supports, or lack thereof if you've seen the History of Supports video. It really is a shame, but I guess for Titania there's so much in the story and supports of Path of Radiance that we're still able to get a good understanding of her character. Titania in the story and her supports is built up to be a super strong experienced fighter, and she does not disappoint in the gameplay department. Titania is widely accepted as one of the best characters in the game, spotting at worst top 5 in every Path of Radiance tier list ever. There's a couple of things that make Titania so immensely powerful. For starters, Titania's base stats are insanely good for the early game. Her bases in strength and speed easily let her double attack and one-on enemies, and her defensive stats make it very hard to get her killed. Usually the super strong early promoted units start to fall off later in the game due to having lackluster growth rates. But Titania didn't seem to get the memo, as she has some of the best growth rates in the game. Almost all of Titania's growth rates are around or above 40%, and her speed and strength growth rates should keep her at the very worst a very solid filler combat unit that might not win her on everything, but on average her growth should most likely let her continue down her path of carnage for the mid game as well. Titania is also in the best class in Path of Radiance besides maybe Wyvern Rider. It's absurd how good paladins are in Path of Radiance. This class can access 2 weapon types, and Titania has the ability to axes, which have the highest weapon might. Cavaliers also get 9 movement alongside the ridiculously broken Canto, referred to as Super Canto in the Tellius games. Canto is an ability mounted units have where they can move after taking actions such as healing or rescuing. Well, in the Tellius games they took Canto, something that's already so good, and boosted it to an even higher level. Super Canto has the ability to be able to move after attacking. This makes it super easy to do hit and runs, attack and move so other units can attack, and sets up super easy dances with Rayson, allowing him to dance for 4 characters while transformed. All these factors make Titania quite an exceptional unit in Path of Radiance. Being able to one-run enemies throughout almost the entire game with 9 move and Super Canto and access to 1-2 range and the highest might weapon class in the game. Everything other than flying was given to Titania on a silver platter in Chapter 1. I find myself using her through the whole game every time I play Path of Radiance. Moving on to Titania's combat utility in Radiant Dawn. She's not the god that she was in Path of Radiance, but Titania is still one of the best combat units in the game. Titania is still mounted, which isn't as overpowered as an FE9 since some maps make it much harder to use horse units, but more times than not being on a horse with 9 move and Canto is a boon, not a bane. You get Titania in part 3, and she starts out with really strong bases, with strength being her most noteworthy. Her speed is a little shaky at 21, she's just at the point where 1 or 2 points can get her into doubling most enemies for a while, and she's a really good candidate for a speed wing if you want to keep her doubling. Her bases in skill and defense are pretty good, and she's going to be needing that bulk from her bases. Her growth rates on the other hand are still some of the best in Radiant Dawn. 60% in strength and 50% in speed is really good for her offense. Defensively, Titania's growth rates aren't as good. Her 20% in defense is really bad, but her res is actually quite decent. I think the biggest problem for Titania defensively is her base HP and gross being a bit lower than she would like. Titania is a good choice for a Seraph Robe to increase her HP, and her defensive bases will keep her relevant. One trick to help out Titania defensively is to give her the Savior skill, which will let her pick up an ally without penalties, and then have her support with a unit that will give her a defense or evasion boost. With Mist for example, she'll get a +3 boost to defense as well as a small boost to attack and hit chance. Another thing going for Titania is that her base level is a lot higher than your other units in part 3, making it a lot easier to promote her at level 21 instead of having to use a Master Crown. Titania is amazing through part 3 and 4, but starts to slow down if she doesn't get a little favoritism. In part 5, Titania is a decent combat unit, but it's harder for her to double some enemies thanks to Gold Knight's mean speed cap. Trivia time! In the beta version of Path of Radiance, Titania was originally planned to be an unpromoted Lance Knight, the same class as Oscar. Titania is the name of Vanessa's Pegasus in Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones. Titania's voice actor Misty Lee also voices Ursula in Heroes and Camilla in both Warriors and Heroes. Titania is currently featured in 5 cipher cards. Titania is a very strong and loyal character. Through the story and supports, we see just how much she means to all of the Greil Mercenaries. She's well liked, trusted, and respected by every member. Titania throughout Greil's death chose to take a back seat to let Ike become commander, a move some didn't approve of and one that she later second guesses. Usually after the death of a loved one, you act with emotion, and through this we see just how much she cared and loved Greil. So much that she thought it would be better to respect his wishes and trust Ike to become the commander of the Greil Mercenaries, and to stay by his side throughout the events of Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn. I think Titania in the character department is a solid 4 out of 5 stars. I think rating Titania's combat utility is going to be the easiest rating ever. There's no doubt in my mind that if Titania was the worst unit in Radiant Dawn, that her power in Path of Radiance is so high that she would still get a high star rating. Since Titania is also an above average combat unit in Radiant Dawn, I think it's fair to give her a 5-star rating here. Titania is so insanely strong that she carries you throughout over half the game in Path of Radiance, and her growth rates are good enough to keep her as one of your better combat units. In Radiant Dawn, Titania is a very solid combat unit with some great offensive stats and growth rates, and multiple ways to patch up her defensive issues later in the game with support, stat boosters, and bonus XP. Titania's design is amazing. It screams strong independent woman. Her striking scarlet hair and giant axe she's always carrying is so badass, as well as the elegant full-plated armor makes her look like someone experienced and in charge. Her design is so beautiful without needing any fan service. All this matches well with her character. I think this is an easy 5 out of 5 stars. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed, hit subscribe so you'll be notified when I upload more scripted Fire Emblem content. I plan on doing some more character analysis in the future, so look forward to those. I'd love for you to leave a comment with some character suggestions. Take care and have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.